Hi, I'm Effie and I'm a bit behind on doing my reading wrap-ups. I know the last reading wrap-up I did was for June. Oh wow, I say I know and then I can't remember, but I've got 3 months worth of books listed in front of me to go through, so it was June. So this wrap-up is going to be for July to September. This wasn't an intentional thing, I'm just a bit rubbish. It's a conversation for a couple of months' time, but I'm thinking about changing the way that I do wrap-ups going forward. I'm thinking maybe what I'll do is do more of a regular videos grouping similar videos to get similar books together. But we'll see. That would be in the new year if I was going to do that change. Anyway, I have, I think, around 40 books to get through of the things that I read in the months of July, August and September. Also, if you see any mess in the room behind me, mind your business. I am currently filming from a hotel room on holiday, so I'm doing the best with what I've got. Also, I hope the lighting's okay. I think it is. Again, best with what I've got. So let's just jump straight into it. I think these are chronological by finish date. So first up we have Imposter Syndrome by Joseph Knox. I picked this up because I absolutely loved True Crime Story by the same author, and I was hoping that this would give the same kind of magic. It's a fine enough mystery thriller, but it's not the same. Like, True Crime Story did something really cool and clever, and that just wasn't what we've got with Imposter Syndrome. This is basically, and I am going to apologise now, I am so bad at remembering character names, in general. I probably won't remember the names of characters in any of these books, unless it's a titular character. So we're following a con man who, when we first join him, he has just arrived in London from Paris. All he's got is the clothes on his back, and immediately he's trying to steal from people. And then he bumps into this woman at, I think it's an airport hotel, and she's like, "Oh, my brother." And he's like, no, you got the wrong person. And she reels him in and is like, "Well, can you pretend to be my brother? Or if you pretend to be my brother, you can get some money, blah, blah, blah." And he just ends up falling down this massive rabbit hole of secrets and deceit. And it's all a little bit unhinged. It's really enjoyable. And just the right side of absolutely bonkers. But as I say, it's a very different book to True Crime Story. So don't go into this book expecting that. But also, it was a good time. And then we've got Queen Bee by Juno Dawson. This book is, I guess it's technically 0.5 in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series by Juno Dawson. It takes place in, you'd think I'd know my British history better, but I don't. About the 1600s, and it's following, it starts with the execution of Anne Boleyn, and it's the idea that she started a coven of witches, and this was the start of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. I had a good time with it, but what I will say is that Dawson has made a decision that makes sense, but also makes it a little bit challenging, in that the magic powers of this world are very clearly defined. You have this kind of magic, or this kind of magic, or this kind of magic, and you can have multiple, but it's more rare, and then you've got levels of power and whatnot. But because this is kind of well, it's not just early days of the Coven, this is like the origins of the Coven. And, you know, even if it wasn't, language does change and evolve. So the powers that you recognise from Her Majesty's Royal Coven and the Shadow Cabinet, like the grouping, the way the powers work is the same, but their names are different. And that was probably the hardest thing for me, was trying to figure out which powers related to like which powers, if that makes sense. I don't know if it does. I also had a little trouble with, I think it was two different characters had like the same first name, and I was getting a little bit confused. I'm not 100% sure, but what I will say is, because I got this as an e-arc, oh my gosh, that creeped me out. That was the sorry, ghosties. That was the hairdryer, I think. Sorry, where was that? I lost my train of thought because I got so creeped out. So where was I? Oh yeah, so I got an e-arc of this, and I think as well, like, my reading experience would have been very different if I'd read this book physically, because having it physically, I'd be able to flick back and forward to the front matter. Also, I do own a physical copy, but I haven't actually double checked, and it's possible that there might have been explanations about, like, this magic power is this magic power is this. As I said, I don't fully remember. Like, it was a good story. I enjoyed the sapphic yearning, the way that characters came into their power, and then I enjoyed reading, I think it was the acknowledgements, maybe it was like a note on the history at the end, but I enjoyed reading that and seeing how it related to a bit of real life history. So that was fun for me. I do think it was the weakest book in the HMRC series, but I also think it was a lot more effective than I thought it was going to be, because I don't read a lot of historical, and most of the time when I'm reading historical, it's kind of like it's Victorian, or it feels Victorian, if you know what I mean. Honeycomb by S.B. Caves. The basic premise of this book is, see, she's not a one-hit wonder, but she's kind of like a one-hit wonder. She gets an offer from a shady pharmaceutical company that basically says to her, we will pay you £250,000 if you participate in this drug experiment where one participant will get the drug and the rest of the participants, I think it's only like 6 people in the whole experiment, or at least that's what she gets told. So only one person gets the drug, the others get the placebo, and this drug is guaranteed to have no harmful effects on you, and it will be life-changing, blah, 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 blah. And she, you know, this book is very surface level when it's discussing this, but essentially the way that she was treated by the British media and paparazzi means that she is very much down on her luck now, and she kind of needs that money. I think she's behind on a rent payment, and she's got other bills coming up for being due. So essentially she goes, okay, I'll do this. It seems like a good idea. It seems like it's going to be safe. Like, she gets talked into it by people. And as the reader, you know that these people are actually being paid by the company to encourage her to participate. And then things get very weird very quickly when she starts participating in the drug trial. But what I absolutely loved about it was the fact that as the reader, you get, like, they use very sparingly, but you get little chapters from the perspective of the drug company, so you have a little bit more knowledge about what's going on with this drug trial. But even then, there's a lot of secrets going on. But, like, the book opens with the drug having been tested on animals. It's not a particularly, like, graphic scene of the drugs being tested on animals. It's your kind of classic, like, lab rats, which obviously different people have different levels of tolerance, but it's, you know, a group of rats and the drugs being used, and you see the impact of it. So you kind of see what it did to the rats, so you are wondering if that's going to happen with the humans, and if it does, that's going to be catastrophic. So it's very interesting seeing it all unravel. And the thing that I loved, so this book is published by Angry Robot, or is it Datura? You know, I think it might actually be Datura. The person that does the PR for both of those is the same person, because they're both under Watkins. But you know, because it's the same person, like, pitching them. But basically, she does an incredible job of pitching it. And this book was pitched as Black Mirror meets Big Brother, which, what a combination. I don't think I've ever actually watched any Big Brother, but I am a massive fan of Black Mirror. I actually first got into it in 2011, and this definitely had that kind of Black Mirror feel to it. It was so cool, so well done, and I loved the ending, just utterly, like, my cup of tea. Even though I think a lot of my reading tends to be more in the fantasy sphere. Like, if I'm going to read mystery, thriller, crime, whatever you classify this as, this is what I'm looking for. I guess it's sci-fi. Maybe it is under... No, it's not under Angry. I mean, it's a moot point. It doesn't matter if it's Datura or Angry Robot. I'm telling you, you really should buy it. It's so good. A Short Walk Through a Wide World by Douglas Westerbeke. This is one that immediately I was intrigued by when I first heard about it. It's been comped to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and The Midnight Library, which is one of my all-time most hated books and one of my all-time most favourite books. And if you don't know which is which, well, let me just say I have a V Schwab tattoo. Hopefully that answers it for you, and also what I'm about to say. So this book, basically the premise is that you've got a young woman who has a curse, and she cannot stay in the same place for more than, I think it's 5 days, before she starts getting incredibly sick and has to move on. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Well, no, I don't think it's ever more, but sometimes it is fewer days. Like, it's only when she's lucky that she gets those 5 days. So it's quite an uplifting story, but also it's a very lonely story, because there is this woman who is struggling to find connection because she has to go from place to place to place. And also along the way, she has people that, you know, with the best of intentions, are going, oh, well, what if we do this? And, you know, she faces people trying to kind of get around her curse, but it's a curse. So I think it resonates a lot more with Addie LaRue, the Midnight Library. I think I understand why it has been comped to the Midnight Library, and that's very much about a very specific thing in the book. I don't think it's a spoiler, but also maybe you would see that, but there's like a very specific element of the book that I can see being like the Midnight Library, but it is more a very specific vibe that feels like Addie LaRue, but in just a certain way. I think in the way that Addie LaRue is characterized by stubborn hope and defiant joy, I see that in the main character of this book. But it's different enough that I think you can read it and go, yeah, I love this, but in very different ways. But I also think if you had a good time with Addie LaRue, you are also probably gonna, yeah. I don't know, I feel like I may be repeating myself there. But essentially it is a lot more Addie LaRue than Midnight Library, and that's a very good thing in my book. Happy Ever After by C.C. MacDonald was a very middle of the road domestic mystery thriller. I am so bad at genres, but essentially like a woman's having a bit of a tumultuous marriage. They're trying to have a second child, and she ends up having an affair and then immediately gets pregnant. And then the person that she had an affair with sort of disappears off the face of the earth. Not really, but the connections that she thought they shared are no longer there, and she's kind of going, what on earth is going on? And then her husband is keeping secrets from her, and yeah, it's not great. Anyway, I am going to pause here. So, it's a whole new day, whole new outfit, same room though. Do I think I have enough time to finish filming my wrap up? I'm not sure, but I'm gonna try. So, we got up to Happy Ever After, the last time I was filming, which was just yesterday. It's not like there's been a big gap. And the next book we've got to talk about is A Thing Divine by Rian Adara. This is a vampire book, but I think it's defined as erotic horror. It's basically these two characters. Well, one of them is a centuries old vampire, and the other one doesn't know, but she is the reincarnated soulmate of the vampire, and she's been having dreams about him for years, but she has never met him until she happens to stumble upon him during a tour of a stately home, and then romance ensues. But it is very visceral, it is very like horror, but also erotica. It very much straddles the line. It's done really well, but it is, you know, if it's not your thing, you're not going to enjoy it kind of thing. Does that make sense? I don't know. It is probably the most like twisted, dark, romance I have ever read, and I really enjoy it. It's got somewhat of an open ending, but I think that works really well for the story. Honeycraves by I.S. Belle is the third and final installment in the Honeyblood series, which follows two high school students. Honey, who is bright, sunshiny, plus size, and has been accidentally turned into a vampire after a band, like a literal musical band, a band of vampires, you know, murders her, but doesn't realise that she has some of their blood in her veins when she dies. So she turns and she's trying to see if she can undo that, and she enlists the help of her childhood best friend, who she'd been previously estranged from, Sadie, who is the grumpy to her sunshine. And it's really cute to see their friendship come back together, but also to see the romance between them blossom. It's a surprisingly soft story for the amount of very bloody murder that happens at times. And this was just, I wouldn't say it was the perfect wrapping up of the series, because I think there's more in this world to be told. And like I.S. Belle has said that, you know, she's thinking of writing more in this world anyway. So there was some stuff I would have liked a little bit more for, but it does have a very much happy for now, and that's not a bad thing, especially because I think HEA is a bit inauthentic when you are talking about teenage characters. That's not to say that, you know, teenagers can't find their forever, but it does feel a little, yeah, you know what I'm saying. I hope you know what I'm saying. I hope I'm making sense. Oh, the next book, Starter Villain by John Scalzi. I read this as part of my reading vlog of books for the Hugos. In fact, I've probably already talked about this book previously, because I had the video where I read, or attempted to read, all of the nominees for this year's Hugos, or finalists technically. But Starter Villain was such a surprise for me. I didn't know what to expect, because I think it's just the UK covers that's now changed, but the original cover with the cat on the front doesn't give you much of an impression of what the story's like. And whilst I prefer that one to the new cover, I understand that the new cover gives you a better idea of the story within this book. Basically, the concept is that a young man, he's not a young man actually, I think he's like 30s, 40s, he's a divorcee, struggling to make ends meet, divorcee, lives in his parents' old home, and it's like jointly owned by his siblings, but like his siblings want to sell it, but because he's living there they can't. And then his uncle dies, and he's estranged from his uncle, but his uncle dies, and his uncle's assistant is like, well, can you represent him at the funeral home? And then like weird things start to happen, and it turns out his uncle was part of a organization of supervillains, and like that is like the concept. It's not spoiler, like this book is all about supervillains, and it's so good in that it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it also feels really smart and well thought out. And it put me in mind of Robert Rankin, who I really enjoyed reading his books. Gosh, I think back when I was a teenager. Yeah, it would have been, because I remember meeting him before I went on holiday to Ireland, and that was when I was 11. Gosh. So yeah, I really would have been a teenager when I read Robert Rankin. Yeah, it put me in mind of that and was a lot of fun. It's a little bit a lot in places, but it still manages just to be incredibly funny, and I had such a good time. And it was such a surprise to me because I'd read one Scalzi before, but it was only a short story, so it was my first time really reading John Scalzi, and oh, just amazing. He Who Bleeds by Dorian Valentine is a quirky kind of story because it starts off with an aristocrat who is in love with the priest at his local church, but obviously he can't be with the priest, he can't be with a man. And then it just unravels into madness. And this book, at the end of the content warnings, it says, like, this is not a love story, but it's such a deeply romantic story between two demons and the murders they commit together. And I am not doing this book justice, but just know that if you are a fan of things like, I think Bible slash, like, it's not quite Bible slash, but it's close. Like, if you're a fan of that, if you're a fan of, like, Dark and Depraved, the couple that slays together stays together, sorry, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. I Will Fornicate in the Blood of Our Kills. Like, if you're a fan of all of that kind of thing, this is the book for you. It's so good. It's so good. And the cover's stunning. And then the final book of July. Wow, we've got through a full month's worth of books, so 2 more months, and like, I think July's the least books I've got to go through as well. The final book was Long Live Evil by Sarah Rees Brennan. The basic principle behind this is that a young woman, I think she's called Rachel, she gets called Ray, so I can't remember if her full name's actually Rachel. She gets an offer to basically end up in the world of her favourite fantasy book. The problem is, like, she absolutely loves this series, but for whatever reason she's never actually fully read the first book, so she gets thrust into the world of her favourite fantasy, but she has been cast as the villain, and this villain is sentenced to die. So she's kind of trying to play catch up. She's trying to use her knowledge of how she believes the story to go to save herself. And it's such a self-aware work. It's very meta, it's funny, it's very reminiscent of Pratchett, in my opinion. And the way that Brennan carries out some of the reveals, when you see them, it's very much like you go, how did I know this was right here all along? And it even, like, in the text is basically makes some kind of comment about, like, when the character realizes this thing, she is basically going, it literally, it was there all along. It was right in front of my face. And I'm very excited to see where the rest of this story goes, because we end in such a way that it is a cliffhanger. It's satisfying. This book is very satisfying in its own right, but the ramifications of the first book are going to ripple so much with the story, and I'm so fascinated to know where it goes next. Next Chapter of Us by Elayna Rose is a second chance romance between two musicians, and This is a book where I can't really do it justice because I had a really hard time with it. Basically, it's spelt differently, but the FMC is called Effie, and I just couldn't. Like, it made me really deeply uncomfortable, especially because this is a spicy book, and like I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. I had a suspicion that I would feel this way about reading a book with a character with the same name as me, and that's why I've never read A Study in Drowning. But now I know this, I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. And to make it even worse, at some points this character gets called F, and I'm like, yeah, people call me F sometimes. So yeah, like, it's a really good book, but it made me want to crawl out of my own skin. True North by Carina Gaskell, I didn't enjoy. I think it's definitely got a romance. It is a romance. It's definitely got a readership, but that readership very definitely is not me. I didn't like this sort of sweet romance, and like, it's he falls first, but like, he falls before he's even met her, which already had me on the back foot. I think the idea is like she's down with that, but I just no thank you. Mammoths at the Gates by Nghi is the fourth book, I believe, in the Singing Hills cycle, which follows Cleric Chi as they travel around, I think it's Kingdom. They go on their travels and they get stories from various different people. But this one, maybe it's just that I appreciate it more reading it with my eyes, or maybe this is the strongest novella in the Singing Hills cycle that I've read. But I absolutely adored this one. It's a much more personal story because Cleric Chi comes back to the Abbey and finds that, I think it's the High Cleric, has died. So this is an exploration of not only grief, but of the way that we remember those who have died. And it's a very close look at grief because Chi is constantly ruminating on how important the person that has died was to them. And then you're also getting a story with the Hoopos, the birds that help keep the stories. I don't know, I think if you're not familiar with this series, it might not make sense, but basically there's these birds that act as the archives. That's what they are. They act as the archives and keep all of the stories faithfully with what people say. So think of them like living dictaphones, I suppose. And there's kind of a, I say a side story, but is kind of integral to the main plot that involves these birds that I think is so interesting and clever. And I really enjoyed that as well. Like, it was just such a good novella and very thought-provoking and had me crying. And if a book makes me cry, it's a win in my book. I'm just going to pause here because I think Bee's stepping out the shower, but hopefully I'll have a chance to come back and talk about a few more before we head out. Another day, another hotel, and hopefully this time, hopefully the audio is okay. I have got a microphone attached, but obviously I don't know if it is obvious, but there's music playing in the background. Hopefully. Anyway, we are hopefully going to finish my wrap up today. I think whilst this has been a somewhat messy video, I think it's been quite a realistic look at, I suppose, like trying to squeeze in time to film. Oh, sorry, the reflection. Trying to squeeze in time to film, but also, like, I have been working off a spoon deficit this week, and I don't know, like, I have never felt this exhausted in my life. Anyway, back to the books. So I think the next book we needed to talk about was The Hunter's Gambit by Ciel Pierlot. This is a vampire book. Are we surprised? It's me. But it's like slutty, poly, bisexual vampires, which again, are we surprised? It's me. And I just had the best time reading it. Absolutely loved it. The idea behind it is, I think it's every year, every certain number of years, the vampires need to choose a human who becomes their king or queen for, I think it's 3 days. And then at the end of that period of time, they are sacrificed, and it's required to keep vampire society running. I really enjoyed how visceral and bloody this story was, but also, as I say, the vampires were very slutty, very poly. It was utterly fantastic, and I'm so excited to read Ciel's next book that comes out next year. The Heart of Desire and Deceit by Alaina or Gallea is the sequel to A Game of Love and Betrayal, which has been described by the author as Crescent City / Twilight meets Love is Blind. A vampire who is also an assassin enters a blind love competition with the intention of murdering the man she believes killed her whole family. Except real feelings end up happening along the way. So this is the second part of the duology and kind of wrapping up a lot of the storylines that are in that story. False Confidence by Sophie Snow. Sophie Snow has very quickly become one of my favourite authors. She writes romance, contemporary romance, and they're all casually queer. They often have some real like emotional work being done by the characters, and I just find them so satisfying and enjoyable to read. They just very much hit the spot for me. So False Confidence follows Jazz, who hasn't had an orgasm in 10 years, and Liam, who is the new stepson of Jazz's best friend. Her best friend is in an age gap romance, so her best friend's new husband is twice her age. So there's actually, like, there is technically an age gap between Liam and Jasmine, but it's that Liam is, I think, 7 years older than Jasmine. But like Jasmine's, I think 30, almost 30. But it was so good. I am so sorry, my vocabulary apparently has been very limited this week. Like, it makes sense that working in a spoon deficit, I also lose mental capacity. What worked for me about this book was that it could have been, is that the story could have been very gimmicky, but it was clear that Snow had done the work to make this a really meaningful relationship between these two characters. And like, Liam's not just trying to get Jazz off. Like, Liam is trying to show her care, create a comforting environment for her, and just all round it's showing a lot of, I guess, aftercare, but like aftercare as an ongoing process during, you know, sexual encounters. Like, obviously there is kink to it, but even in the most vanilla situation, like, aftercare is important. And it was really well written, much like Sophie Snow's other books. Godly Heathens by H.E. Edgmon, I think that's how it's pronounced, I'm not sure, follows a group of teenagers who are the sort of reincarnated gods from a secondary world, and it's primarily following a non-binary teen who isn't aware that he is a reincarnated god until, like, he basically gets told. But for years he's been having very bloody, very visceral dreams, and it's actually kind of memories or overlap from this other world that they were in. I cannot possibly do this story justice, but I just want to say that it is incredibly well executed, and for a story that has, I think it's like 14, 17 different deities, and each of them has at least 3 names. It never gets info dumpy or confusing, and I recommend and will be reading the second part of the duology at some point. 13 Ways to Kill Lulabelle Rock is, I guess, it's like a mystery thriller with a sprinkling of sci-fi, as you are following these clones that are called portraits of this woman, and this woman has challenged her latest clone to kill all of the clones that came before her. So this clone's kind of going on a journey of self-discovery, but also to find all the different clones and kill them. And it gets kind of creative and interesting. It's, I guess what you would call this book is a romp. I had a surprisingly good time with it. I don't know really why it surprised me, but it did. And I'm not going to complain. I will say the vast majority of the books that I read and finish are, you know, absolute slays. I guess, like, if I'm not talking too much about a book, you know it didn't quite work for me, but I would say like 85%, 90% of the time, yeah, I had a great time. I say that, and the next book is The Shadows of Ren by Jen Blyton. The reason this book didn't work for me was not that it was inherently bad, but that it was very generic. I think if you are a fan of YA romantasy type books, like, it's very much along the lines of something like A Court of Thorns and Roses. I was going to say Throne of Glass. I'm trying to think of like any other YA romantasy, and I can't think of any, but you know, you've got shadow magic, like, it's witches, but like same difference really, and you know, hidden powers. You know, it's quite like, there are some cool elements to it, but I just didn't feel particularly engaged. And like I say, it felt like something I've seen so many times before, and it didn't have anything that really made me go, oh yeah, this makes it stand out. I was like, it's whatever. My Vampire Plus One by Jenna Levine is technically the second book in a series, but it's one of these where it's like interconnected standalone contemporary romances. Although I guess it's like paranormal because we've got vampires. But in this particular story, wow, my brain is just not with it today, is it? I'm so sorry. In this particular book, we are following a young woman whose parents are always on her case for her to get a partner or a boyfriend. And I think she's got like an ex that seems to think that he's entitled to her. I could be wrong. That could have been a different book. Maybe it was a different book. I don't know. Oh yeah, that was a different vampire book. But she essentially, like, she bumps into this quirky as anything vampire and says, you know what, I'm going to invite you to as a +1 to this wedding that I need to go to, because that's going to get my family off the case. Except her family end up really loving him, and like she ends up falling for him. And at times it was a little contrived of like, oh, I shouldn't be with him, and it's like, yeah, but you're gonna get with him, so shut up. And it's also a little bit of oh, what was I gonna say? I don't know now. Wow, my brain did not want to function there. Yeah, oh yeah, there was this thing as well where like the vampire told her that he was a vampire, but then she thought it was a joke, and that went on a little bit longer than I would have liked. But also I could understand that in a contemporary setting where vampires are not like the existence of vampires is not well known, someone's not going to take it at face value when you say, oh yeah, I'm actually a vampire. So like I get it, but that didn't make it any less frustrating that it kind of went on for a bit too long. Sister Made a Monster by Lucy A. Snyder, I think, was probably the most unique book that I read in this 3-month period. It is following a global pandemic, not COVID, and in fact COVID still happened in this world. So this is like post-COVID, another pandemic occurs, and it is disproportionately affecting women, whether it's a case of women are just more affected by it, or whether it's a case of men are given more of a pass when they get it, is a little bit open to interpretation. But you essentially have these 3 interconnected women's stories, and like the title is obviously it's riffing on Mother Maiden Crone, but it's being oh gosh, like each of the characters is like the opposite of the things. So sister, no, sorry. Like I know that like the monster is actually the savior, the maiden is a sex worker, and I can't off the top of my head remember what like the flip side of sister is. But seeing like this is a book that very much is like looking at sexism face on, and is taking a look at all the different like ways that women are unfairly treated in society, and the way that this virus has only exacerbated such things. It is heartbreaking at times, and it's also really twisted not in a like I feel wrong for enjoying this, but in the like the cosmic horror is really quite cool, and I enjoyed it. Obviously I enjoyed it. I think it was actually a 5-star read. It was so different and so strange, but a really really good time, and the audiobook is utterly fantastic. How to Bite Your Neighbour and Win a Wager by Dee and Bryn follows 2 young men who knew each other as teenagers but only peripherally. One of them is now a vampire. He became a vampire like not quite accidentally but not quite deliberately. The narrative is kind of saying that he was on a pretty self-destructive path, so the fact that he ended up as a vampire was like the logical conclusion of that. It was kind of like he would have been a vampire or he would have been dead, the path he went on, but that's in his past, so it's kind of a, you know, it's touched on briefly in the story, but it's not like very much on page. And then the other man in the story needs to recruit a vampire to try and figure out what happened with the disappearance of his mother. He believes it involved a pharmaceutical company called Vitalis Baron, and they've basically been like, yeah, we'll give you the keys to the facility, but you need to recruit a vampire for us. And there's a little bit of like a comedic chase going on where they're trying to where Vitalis Baron are trying to capture the the vampire main character, and also the non-vampire main character is feeling a bit torn about whether he should turn in this vampire. And he's like, oh well, he came into my room at night to steal my blood, so he's not a good guy. But then he's like, but he needed to, he didn't have an option. So, and it became this really like cute romance, and yeah, oh dear me, I highly recommend it. It was one of my favorite books from this 3-month period. Maybe at the end of this video I'll give you like a rundown of like the 3 best and worst, because this has been a very disjointed video, and I also feel like I haven't necessarily had the words to say what I want to say. And we have made it to September. Yay! We still have a chunk of books to get through, but at least those should be a bit fresher in my mind. That's the hope anyway. So starting off the month, we have 4 vampire books. No, we've got 1 non-vampire like mixed in. But the 4 vampire books were Immortal Dark, Forever Red, Vampires Never Say Die, and His Fate by Vengeance. Vampires Never Say Die, I didn't particularly like, mostly because I don't think it tackled the body dysmorphia in a way that felt sensitive to, you know, to people that may struggle, I suppose. The basic premise is that when vampires are created, a balance must be restored, so a slayer is created alongside a new vampire. So what ends up happening is this bartender come actress, that's a whole other thing I didn't like about it, but this bartender come actress ends up feeling a literal murderous rage. She literally wants to kill her co-worker one night, and then the next morning she wakes up very buff, I think 30 pounds heavier, and obviously, you know, if you're going to have that overnight transformation, it is going to cause a dysmorphia. But the way that it was talked about was as if like her being muscular and buff was her being fat, and there was like talk of like counting calories and skipping cakes and stuff, and it felt very uncomfortable. And then there was the way that like by the end of it she really liked like her new body and what being a slayer did for her, and it became a thing where it was a case of like between the man and like giving up something that she loved and appreciated. And that is such a hard storyline to write, and I just don't think it was done well. Like it's a vampire slayer romance, but nah, I would give it a pass, honestly. Like I think a lot of people are gonna read and enjoy it, but for me, I just don't think it was handled well. I think there's much better vampire books out there, and whilst I can't off the top of my head think of a good vampire and slayer romance, there are multiple ones out there. Immortal Dark, on the other hand, fantastic. This is a book full of black characters, both as vampires and non-vampires. It is a dark academia, and the non-vampires are going to this university where they are learning to become the companions of the vampires, and being a companion means that the vampires drink your blood, but it's something that is very revered within their society. But our main character doesn't want that. She just wants to find out what happened to her sister, and she believes that a vampire called Susenyos was responsible, and she ends up having to live in the house with Susenyos. Otherwise, like, she loses her inheritance and he gets it. But there's an incredible, like, slow burn romance happening within the story, but also they're trying to find out, like, I think there's murders going on, and our main character has murdered, like, the book opens with her murdering someone or having just murdered someone, like she's in prison for it. So it's very vicious and visceral at times, and so engaging as a story. Forever Red is the prequel, but also slightly the sequel to Fallen Thorns by Harvey Oliver Baxter. It follows the band Forever Red that were featured in Fallen Thorns, and it takes you through from their inception right up until a couple of months after the end of Fallen Thorns. It's written kind of through, like, it's sort of mixed media in that you've got some interviews that are giving you some of the backstory, and then you've also got alternating POVs between the character of Casper and the character of Benjamin, and you are seeing them kind of slowly fall in love, and this deep, beautiful love between them, and it's also a love for themselves. I love this series, and I am very interested to see where the sequel goes, especially because there was something hinted at in the afterword of Forever Red that makes me think we could be getting some very satisfying moments coming up soon. His Mate by Vengeance is a vampire wolf romance. It is a little bit Omegaverse. The vampire is an assassin, and the wolf is... So, I don't know, like, super a lot about the Omegaverse, and I am planning a video around, like, as a beginner to the Omegaverse. Like, these are the books I've read, this is my impression of the Omegaverse. But in this one, like, you can have, like, multiple alphas, but, like, there's only, like, a leader of a pack, so you can be not the leader of the pack, but still have alpha tendencies. So our werewolf is an alpha, but he's not his pack leader, and his family got murdered when he was just a child. I think he's in, like, his 50s or 60s. I liked that our characters were a bit older. And there's not, if I remember rightly, there's not a massive age gap between them, but I could be wrong. And yeah, what was I going to say? Like, they don't want to fall in love. Well, the wolf doesn't want to fall in love with the vampire. The vampire is immediately like, oh, that's a hot piece of ass. And you're following them, you know, slowly go, oh, this is really something. And then, like, at the end, I just wanted more. And I think we will see more, but not necessarily, like, focus on them, because this is the start of a series from this author, so I imagine these will be recurring characters. But actually, like, highly recommend. And it was one that, I don't know, like, obviously I don't pick up a book, I don't generally pick up books I don't think I'm gonna at least like, but this was a book that was, like, 5 stars start to finish. I had the absolute best time with it and could not get enough. And then the non-vampire book I read in the middle of that was Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White. This is probably White's most violent book to date, and not just physically, like, it's very emotionally violent. And it's also weirdly, like, it doesn't have as explicit a content warning, trigger warning page at the beginning, or at least I didn't see one like that. It's a love letter to Appalachia, but it's also about how difficult Appalachia can be at times. We are following a young trans boy who is dealing with the generational trauma and, you know, 100+ year family feud between these two families, but like this is a feud where like they are murdering each other and over very seemingly trivial things, and he starts to learn some things about his ancestors, and then also he is being targeted by the teenage boy of the rival family. And it's, again, I'm very much not doing this book justice. I audiobooked it and it was a hard listen, but it was so worthwhile. And if you can manage it, bearing in mind it is incredibly visceral and violent, and there are scenes involving like hunting animals and, you know, the inherent transphobia. I think there's also some homophobia mixed in, just for a bit of extra fun. But I do think it's worth reading, and I think White is definitely one of those authors where I go, yes. Especially because the trans experience is shown in a very complex way. It's not, you know, this simplified, you're trans or you're not, and there's only one way to be trans. Like, all ways of being trans are valid, and everyone is going to be a little bit different in their transness, and a trans person wanting something different from another trans person makes them no less valid. And I love that White shows and explores that so authentically in his books. A Curse of Breath and Blood by K.W. Foster felt very reminiscent of ACOTAR, but like slightly older characters. Like it was more a vibes thing than a plotting thing. So, and I hate that I keep comparing things to ACOTAR. I think because it is such an easy touchstone to be like, yeah, if you're looking for like the vibes of ACOTAR, this is a really good one. I do wish the next book was already out. Like, obviously, like I know how books work, but it's so hard when you read an arc of a book and then you realize that there's, you know, it's not a standalone, and you immediately need the next book, and you go, I don't know when it's coming, but I need it like yesterday. It does feature a love triangle, and it is a love triangle where I feel like it's trying to push you towards one or the other, but I'm also not sure. And like, I definitely have a preference. I have a very strong preference. Like, one of the potential suitors I actually don't like as an option, so that obviously will impact my ongoing enjoyment of the series. But it is a very serviceable story. The FMC is not a damsel in distress. She is very, very capable, and the men in her life fully respect her and stand beside her. And as I say, vibes of ACOTAR if you're looking for that kind of vibe. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole and started reading Bonded by Thorns, and then went on to Woven by Gold, and I'm still making my way through, what's the one? Because it's not Broken by Daylight, because that's the most recent one. I don't know, the Springs book. And I mean, that's a whole thing as well, is that the covers themselves feel like spoilers, which is interesting. I actually don't like these books very much. Like, they're incredibly addictive, but they're absolutely terrible. It isn't until I think it's like 400 pages into book 2 that you get P&V, and I'm not saying like that's the be all end all, but it's a case, it's more the way that it sets it up, that like this character keeps trying to have P&V, and then something always keeps happening, and it becomes very contrived. Like, I think it's one thing if it sets out to have, you know, different variations of sex. But it's that, like, every time she's trying to have P&V and every time something comes up. Also, there's an sex scene in book 1 that is written from her perspective. So it's everything that gets criticized about romance written by women, in that it is literally a scene of 2 men having sex written for the titillation of the female character who is watching them have sex. And you know, the characters enjoy her watching them, but to write that scene deliberately to titillate her made me incredibly uncomfortable. And yeah, so a lot of it just comes down to being very contrived. I do find it interesting, the fantasy side of things with what's going on with the plotting, although I am pretty annoyed that there are a number of things that feel quite obvious, that at the point that I'm at, I don't know, I can't remember how far into book 3 I am, but like I'm over 1,000 pages deep into this series at this point, and there's things that seemed pretty obvious from almost the start of book 1 that still haven't been explored on page. And from glancing at reviews for book 4, because I realised that the covers were spoilers, and I went, oh, this is not a 4-book series. So I was glancing through reviews for book 4 to see if that was correct, and that is correct. It's not a 4-book series, so even when I get to the end of book 4, I'm not done. So I was glancing through reviews, and a lot of people were like, oh, we finally get answers about things. And it's just like, really? Like, you're talking about like near enough 2,000 pages into a series, and you've got stuff that seems to have been present from the start. Also, as I say, it really annoys me that the covers like give the game away. And yeah, I just think that there was a way that these books could have been written that could have balanced the fantasy and the romance better, but that wasn't what we got in these books. Almost to the end. We've got 6 more, I think. So, The Ravening by Daniel Church is a folk horror book following a young woman called, I think, Jade. The blurb for this book is incredibly vague, so I'm going to try and be vague as well. When she was 15 years old, her mother went missing on a dark road in the middle of the night, and that has clearly left an impression on her. And now 15 years later, sometime later, she is finally starting to be happy. She's got a girlfriend that she loves, and then her past starts catching up with her. And yeah, you've got folk horror elements. It's also a book that is touching on some sexism. There's the love story between Jade and her girlfriend. So there are a lot of elements to the book that really, really worked. And I was so pleasantly surprised by this book. And also, I'm just like, Angry Robot treat me so well. Like, I got a physical arc of this book, and it was everything I could have wanted and more. Daniel Church writes so well. It's such a vivid story. You understand what's happening. The pacing is utterly perfect. Twists and turns throughout. Like, I did have some misgivings about the ending, but I also think the ending couldn't have been anything other than it was. And I think as much as there was the potential for the ending to have gone in a different direction, I think I probably would be having a similar conversation going, I didn't like the ending being what it was. So I think the ending we got was the best possible ending for the story that was being told. Odd Spirits by S.T. Gibson is a prequel to the Summoner's Circle series. It's like 0.5, and it follows Moira and Rees as newlyweds as they have to battle a presence in their house. So it's about it's such a romantic story, but it's about like living up to the expectations you make for yourself as a partner, and also, you know, about the teething that can come with being a newlywed or like very much like in a committed relationship. But you know, it's not always easy, but it is always beautiful, and that's what this book was. And you know, it was gorgeous, and I recognized a lot of things in it. And I don't know, I'm almost at the end, and I'm you know, I loved it. Sorry, B's just off camera being a goosey self. just looking at his face, basically. Shoestring Theory by Mariana Costa is a cozy fantasy, somehow, about a wizard who realizes that he is about to die and decides to use his death to carry out an incredibly powerful spell that essentially needs a human sacrifice. And that spell is to go back in time and murder his husband before he causes the ruin of the Empire, which doesn't sound like it would be very cozy, but it really is. And it has a gorgeous, it's pictures like a love quadrangle. You have multiple, you have two potential romantic partners for our main character, and like you could see it being either of them. There are plenty of twists and turns, lots of intrigue, and at the heart of it is a fantastic friendship between this wizard and the person who was the queen. You also have a familiar called Shoestring who gets up to all kinds of hijinks. And I'm going to leave it at that. Another 5-star read. It was utterly fantastic, and like the artwork on the copy that I have is gorgeous. I definitely think I'm becoming less of a skeptic about cozy fantasy. I think it's possibly a case of like any genre, there's going to be cozy fantasy that works. I just happened to, the first cozy fantasy, or the first book that I'd read that was actually labelled as cozy fantasy, that I knew was cozy fantasy, was Bookshops and Bone Dust, which I really didn't enjoy, but I have had some good experiences with cozy fantasy. And if you are looking for that, Shoestring Theory is exactly what you're looking for. 3 more books, but 2 of them are a series. So we've got Alpha Inmate and Alpha Ruined by Liliana Carlisle, and I am not going to speak too much on them, but basically they are a Megaverse. The alphas are literal murderers. It was the first time I'd read a book that involved the concept of slick, and I want to soap my eyes every time I see that word. They're not amazing, but they're fine. I think there's probably much better Omegaverse books out there. The reason I read these was because in Alpha Ruined, the MMC breaks into her house and fills her fridge with artisanal cheeses. And yes, please, well, like not literally, please do not break into my house, but I will take all the artisanal cheese. So I wanted to see how that all played out. And then when I went to borrow it on KU, it said that like this can be read on its own, but it's better read after Alpha Inmate. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think you should actually reverse the order and read Alpha Ruined first, and then if you want, go back and read Alpha Inmate, because Alpha Inmate is the story of what happened, what actually happened. Words. The reason for that is in Alpha Ruined, the FMC is a journalist researching the story of what actually happened in Alpha Inmate. So you have a lot more information if you read it Inmate first, then Ruined. And I think it actually takes away from the story by doing that and having that information in advance. And then the final book, actually at the end, is The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brammer. I do think it was a little bit trite in places, but essentially this is following a deaf doula called Clover, and she keeps 3 journals, regrets, confessions, and advice from all of the people that she doulas for. And along the way, she basically like recognizes that she isn't truly living. She isn't truly taking what she has learned as a doula and bringing it into her life. So she, I guess, like sets about to change that. But this is a book about grief, acceptance, death. It looks straight at death and doesn't shy away, which I really appreciate. But it is going to be quite confronting, especially if you have, fresh grief. But I think, apart from, as I say, being a little bit trite in places, Brammer did pull off this book very well. Anyway, I'm really hoping this footage is usable, but we are finally at the end. So, oh yes, best and worst. So the 3 worst, I'm going to say, okay, so 3 worst, we're going to go with Vampires Never Say Die, The Shadows of Ran, and what else did I really dislike? True North. They are going to work for readers like they are. None of them are inherently bad books, but for my personal taste, they weren't great. I definitely would be giving them a miss. As for the 3 best, that is virtually impossible. So I'm going to give a disclaimer and say these aren't necessarily going to be the absolute best 3 of this 3-month period, because I did read an awful lot of really good books, but got to be His Mate by Vengeance is one, Sister Made a Monster, and Long Live Evil. There's a lot of other books I could have said, ask me in 2 minutes and I'll give you 3 different answers. But yeah, if you are looking for the 3 best and worst of this period of time, that is what I'm going to tell you. But until next time, love you. Bye.